The
Yeah.
news about Savannah's brother-in-law is
Yeah.
huge. I
Yeah.
mean, that if that's look, I have to be honest, a lot of people initially thought should we be looking at the family because just that's
It's the way it works.
90 that's who it is. Usually crime is not committed by some random person coming into a home and kidnapping an 84-year-old. Usually it's a tragedy that somebody
Knows
made a
where
terrible.
both cameras are.
Yeah, exactly. Knows where both cameras are, front and back, and possibly manages to get her to open the door or somehow maybe has a relationship with her.
Shifting to an even stranger angle, a local named Katerina Quinn posted that her best friend's sister lives next door to one of Tomasso's bandmates, believed to be Dominic Evans. She says police have been at that house all day, and things are getting more intense. Dominic has reportedly been missing for over a week as well alongside Tommaso, and he has a criminal history in Arizona with past arrest for burglary, robbery, embezzlement, and DUI. 104 days ago, an 84-year-old woman walked into her own house on a quiet Saturday night in Tucson, Arizona. She locked her front door. She turned off her porch light. And somewhere between 1:47 in the morning and the time the sun came up over the Catalina foothills, Nancy Guthrie vanished. No body, no witness, no arrest, no suspect publicly named. But this week, something cracked. 2 DNA profiles pulled from inside that house. 2 unknown men. Neither matches any of the 19 million offenders in the FBI's national database. And right now in a laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, the same forensic genealogist who unmasked the Golden State Killer after 40 years of silence is working those samples line by line, marker by marker, building a family tree that ends with a name the FBI does not have yet. A name that 2 of the most credentialed criminal profilers in the United States went on national television last week and suggested may already be dead, killed by the person who hired him. The internet has decided who those 2 men are. They've named them. They've built timelines around them. They've pulled 20-year-old photographs off the web and circled details on their wrists. The FBI has not confirmed a single one of those names. But what the director of the FBI did say on the record, on camera, in front of a national audience just 9 days ago is the most explosive admission anyone in this investigation has made from day one. It is the reason this case stalled. It is the reason Nancy is still missing. And until you hear it, you cannot understand why everything is about to change. I'm going to show you what they're not telling you. Let's start with what is actually verifiably on the record because every theory, every name, every Reddit thread has to be measured against this. There are 2 DNA profiles in this case. Not 1, 2. Profile number 1 was recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, biological material, and the sheriff's department has been deliberately vague about exactly what kind and exactly where it was found because they are protecting their case. What we know is that it does not belong to Nancy. It does not belong to her 3 children, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron. It does not belong to her son-in-law, Tommaso Shin. It does not belong to any contractor, any cleaner, any neighbor, any single person who had a legitimate reason to be inside that house and who has been swabbed in the last 100 days. Profile number 2 was found roughly 2 miles from the home. The sheriff's department has not publicly described the object it came from, but multiple outlets have reported it was recovered from an item of the kind a person would discard after committing a crime. 2 profiles, 2 men, both unknown, both unaccounted for, both completely absent from the FBI's combined DNA index system, CODIS, the national database that holds the genetic profile of nearly every person ever convicted of a qualifying felony in the United States. Neither man is in there. On the surface, that sounds like a dead end. The FBI matched against everyone they had on file and nobody came back. Case closed, investigation stalled. Except that is not what it means at all. And to understand why, you have to understand what the FBI is actually doing right now. In mid-April, Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed that DNA evidence from NY's home had been transferred to the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia. That by itself would be standard procedure. But what came next is not standard. The FBI is working in partnership with Australia Forensics, a California-based laboratory that specializes in something called low-copy number DNA analysis. That is the analysis of genetic material that is degraded, fragmented, or present in quantities so small that conventional methods would produce nothing readable. And working alongside that lab is C.C. Moore. If you do not know that name, I need you to remember it because by the end of this case, it is going to be everywhere. C.C. Moore is the forensic genealogist whose work was central to the identification of Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer. A man who had evaded capture for more than 40 years and who was caught not by traditional investigation, but by uploading crime scene DNA into a public ancestry database and finding a distant cousin who had no idea their genetic data would one day lead the FBI to a serial murderer. C.C. Moore told News Nations last month that because the Nancy Guthrie case is not yet a cold case because it is still active, still funded, still prioritized, the DNA will be worked on immediately, fast-tracked, pushed to the front of every queue. My guess is that because this is not a cold case yet, and most of the cases are where we're using rootless hair, that they will push this to the top of the priority list and get it done more quickly. Think about what that means. The FBI is not waiting for either of these two men to commit another crime and get arrested. They are not waiting for either of them to walk involuntarily. They are uploading the genetic profile of an unknown male suspect in databases that contain the DNA of millions of ordinary Americans who took an ancestry test for fun. They are building a family tree backwards. A second cousin, a great aunt, a grandparent in common, a surname that repeats, a geographic cluster that narrows. And from that family tree, they will arrive at a name. That is not a theory. That is a methodology that has produced convictions in dozens of cases considered permanently unsolvable. It is the same methodology that took down the Golden State Killer. It is being used right now on this case with two separate genetic profiles, meaning two independent threads to pull, two independent family trees to build, two independent chances to find the connection. When that name comes, it will not come as a leak. It will not come as a rumor. It will come as a federal arrest warrant. On May 5, 2026, FBI Director Kash Patel sat down with Shan Hannity for a podcast interview. And for the first time in this entire investigation, the head of the FBI publicly broke ranks with the local sheriff's department running the case. What he said next is the most consequential statement any law enforcement official has made about this case from the beginning. For 4 days, Patel told Hannity, we were kept out of the investigation. 4 days. In a kidnapping case, that is not a procedural footnote. That is a wound. Patel said, the first 48 hours of any disappearance are the most critical. Every investigator who has ever worked one will tell you the same thing. After 72 hours, the statistical probability of recovering a missing person alive drops off a cliff. Witnesses forget. Surveillance footage gets overwritten. Trails go cold. The window closes, and once it closes, it does not reopen. Patel said the FBI had hundreds of agents ready to deploy on day one. He said the Bureau had a plane prepared to fly DNA evidence directly to the Quantico laboratory, what he called on the record the best lab in the world. He said the FBI was ready to mobilize the full weight of federal resources behind a kidnapping investigation involving the elderly mother of a nationally recognized television journalist. And for 4 days, according to the director of the FBI, that mobilization did not happen. Instead, the Pima County Sheriff's Department sent the DNA evidence to a private laboratory in Florida. Hannity called it on the record a bad call. Patel saw, and you have to read between the lines here because this is the FBI director speaking carefully, declined to use those exact words. What he did say was thighs. We would have analyzed it within days and maybe gotten better information. Our lab is just better than any other private lab out there. He also said it was, quote, a state and local matter, so it's their call. Translation, the sheriff had the legal authority to make that decision. The question Patel was raising without quite raising it directly was whether that decision should have been made the way it was made. Sheriff Chris Nanos pushed back immediately. He issued a statement saying the FBI was notified the night Nancy disappeared. He said a member of the FBI task force was on the scene that first night. He said coordination with the Bureau began without delay. He said the decisions about evidence processing were made on the ground based on operational needs. Both of these statements cannot be fully true. Either the FBI was working hand in glove with the Sheriff's Department from hour one, as Nanos claims, or the FBI was sidelined for 4 days, as Patel claims. They are not describing the same investigation. And the question every person watching this video should be asking, the question I cannot stop asking is this: why? Why would a sheriff's department hold off the FBI in a high-profile kidnapping case involving an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker with limited mobility with daily medication requirements she could not afford to go without? Why would the most advanced forensic DNA laboratory in the world be passed over in favor of a private lab in Florida? There are answers people are offering. Some are about politics, some are about jurisdiction, some are about pride, but all of them lead to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Somebody somewhere made a series of decisions in the first 96 hours of this case that an 84-year-old woman is now paying for. The internet has noticed. The pressure on the sheriff's department right now is unlike anything they have ever faced. And as of this week, Sheriff Nanos has changed his language. He used to say the investigation was active. Now he is saying in his own words given to Fox News on May 8th, "We are closer." Before I show you the two names the internet has been screaming about for 3 months, I need you to understand one thing, because everything that comes next only makes sense if you remember this. The FBI has not named a suspect. The sheriff publicly cleared NY's immediate family in February. No charges have been filed against any person in connection with this case. Anyone who tells you they know who did this, me included, is telling you something that the federal government, with all of its resources, has so far refused to confirm. What I am about to walk you through is why the online conversation has converged on two specific men, and I am going to show you side by side what is documented in the public record and what is being asserted on top of it, because the gap between those two things is where every viral theory in this case lives. Stay with me. This is the part the algorithm doesn't want you to skip. Two names, two private citizens, two men the FBI has not charged, has not named, has not publicly identified as suspects or even as persons of interests. Tomasso and Dominic Evans. If you have been following this case in any depth at all, you already know those names. They are everywhere. They are in the comment sections. They are in the Reddit threads. They are in the YouTube videos that have collectively pulled tens of millions of views over the last 3 months. And what I'm about to walk you through is going to make some of you uncomfortable, because the story you have been told about these two men and the story the actual reporting tells are not the same story. Start with Tommaso. Tommaso is 50 years old. He was born in Italy. He has been married to Nancy Guthrie, NY's eldest daughter, and since 2006, that is 20 years inside the family. 20 years of Sunday dinners, 20 years of walking through NY's gate, 20 years of holiday photographs and Christmas mornings and birthdays. He is a teacher, not a high-powered executive, not a public figure. A man who by every public account lived a quiet life with his wife. In Tucson, until the morning of February 1st, when his mother-in-law disappeared from a house he had visited hundreds of times. The reason armchair investigators online have fixated on him is a combination of 3 things, and I will give them to you straight. The first thing is the timeline. Tomasso, by the family's own account and by law enforcement's confirmation, was the last known person to see Nancy alive. He drove her home from his and Annie's house after dinner on the evening of January 31st. He walked her to her front door. He said goodbye. He drove away. That is not by itself evidence of anything. Someone has to be the last person. In countless cases, the last person to see a victim has turned out to be a totally innocent family member who happened to be there at the wrong time. Being the last known witness is a fact, not a verdict. The second thing is that early in the case, former News Nation journalist Ashley Banfield referenced Shin's name on her podcast in a context that some viewers interpreted as labeling him a possible prime suspect. That single phrase, repeated and amplified across the internet, became the foundation for thousands of hours of online speculation that has continued for 3 months. The third thing is the silence. Every member of the Guthrie family has spoken publicly about NY's disappearance. Savannah has cried on national television. Annie has cooperated with media. Cameron has made appearances. Tommaso, as far as the public record shows, has not given a single on-camera statement about the disappearance of his mother-in-law. Online, that silence is being read as guilt, but silence is one of the most misread signals in criminal investigation. People grieve differently. People are advised by attorneys differently. People who live in a household with someone who is the public face of a national news story may make the decision for the protection of their spouse, for the protection of the investigation, for any number of reasons to step back from the cameras. And here is the part that the internet has by and large refused to engage with. In February 2026, Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly cleared all of NY's siblings and their spouses, every single one of them, as suspects in the investigation. That clearance by name and by category included Tomasso, now Dominic Evans. And this is where I have to ask you to sit with me for a minute, because if you have come into this video believing that Dominic Evans is the masked man on Nancy Guthrie's porch, and that is what enormous portions of the internet have been screaming for 3 months, what I'm about to tell you is going to land hard. Dominic Evans is 48 years old. He is a 5th grade elementary school teacher in the Tucson area. He is married. He has a 6-year-old son, and he plays drums in a Tucson rock band called Early Black, a band whose other founding member on bass is Tomasso. The two men have played music together since 2007. That is the entire documented connection between Dominic Evans and the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. He is a teacher who plays in a band with the son-in-law of a missing woman. That connection alone, that single thread, was enough for the internet to decide he was the masked figure on the doorbell camera. The speculation built itself out of thin air. Some online users claimed his eyes resembled the eyes visible above the ski mask in the FBI's released images. Others pointed to a decades-old arrest from 1999. Court records show it involved minor theft and cited it as evidence of a violent criminal past. Photographs of him performing with his band were pulled off the internet and circulated as proof of physical resemblance to the suspect. His band's debut album title, Life, Love, Murder, released in 2009, was held up as some kind of psychological tell. In February 2026, Dominic Evans sat down with the New York Times. He told them his name had spread across the internet so fast that he and his wife had spent days hiding in their bedroom with the lights off, afraid they were being followed. His 6-year-old son spent a night away with his grandmother because his parents could not guarantee that their own home was safe. The Times described what was happening to him as a real-life nightmare. In Evans's own words to the Times, "I feel like someone's taken my name." When the Times asked him why he thought he had become a target, he said this: "I don't know. Monetary clickbait to be relevant entertainment, but there are innocent people that get hurt." Now, here is the part that almost no YouTube channel has put in front of you, because it cuts directly against the narrative that has built this case into a 3-month feeding frenzy. Sheriff Chris Nanos, the man running this investigation, the man with access to all the actual evidence, the man who has been publicly criticized by the FBI director himself. Sheriff Nanos spoke to the New York Times about Dominic Evans. What he said is this: "He's going through hell and it is horrible. And I don't know what to tell him except he probably should be speaking with some attorneys and sue some of these people for legal." Stop. Read that again. That is not the FBI being coy. That is not a department official with no information speculating from a distance. That is the sheriff in charge of this case on the record to a national newspaper, suggesting that the man the internet has spent 3 months calling a kidnapper should consider suing those people for legal. Evans told the Times he sat for an interview with investigators that lasted approximately 40 minutes. He said he has not been contacted by them since 40 minutes. That is what a preliminary screening interview looks like. This the kind of conversation investigators conduct with every person remotely connected to a victim, family, friends, neighbors, people who knew the family socially. Not the 8-hour interrogation sessions you see on television dramas. 40 minutes and then nothing. If Dominic Evans were the masked man on Nancy Guthrie's porch, if the FBI had any meaningful evidence pointing in his direction, that conversation would not have been 40 minutes. It would not have ended 3 months ago. He would not be giving on their interviews to the New York Times about his suffering. He would be in federal custody. He is not in federal custody. He is a 5th-grade teacher in Tucson trying to put his life back together. This is what the title of this video is asking. Are Tommaso Shin and Dominic Evans exposed? Has the FBI's new report changed everything? Here is the honest answer, the one that runs against the grain of 3 months of online consensus. The 2 DNA profiles found in this investigation belong to 2 unknown males. Whether either of those profiles will eventually match either of these 2 men, no member of the public currently knows. The FBI has not said. The sheriff has not said. And the sheriff has. And this is the part you have to weigh against everything else you have heard for 3 months. Publicly defended Dominic Evans and suggested the people accusing him should be sued. That is the new report. That is what changes everything. Not a confirmation, a complication, a reminder that the internet's certainty about who did this has so far run dramatically ahead of what the people with the actual evidence have been willing to say out loud. When the genetic genealogy results come back from Quantico, and they are coming, the answer will not be ambiguous. It will either be one of these 2 men, or it will not be. And every single person who spent 3 months building viral content around their names is going to find out in public whether they were right or whether they were part of something a lot uglier than they ever wanted to admit. The entire country is waiting. If you've made it this far, here's where it stops being theory and starts being something else entirely. Because everything I've shown you so far, the 2 profiles, the 4-day delay, the names being whispered online, that is the public part of this case. The part anyone with a search engine and a few hours could piece together. What I'm about to show you is the moment 3 people who have spent their entire careers inside the architecture of American criminal investigation sat down on national television and said something on the record that, if it is true, changes the shape of everything we think we understand about what happened to Nancy Guthrie. On May 6, 2026, a 1-hour documentary special aired on News Nation. It was hosted by senior correspondent Brian Entin, who has covered this case from the first week, and it brought together 3 of the most credentialed names in American criminal psychology to sit down together and look at the evidence with cameras rolling. Dr. Ann Burgess, forensic nurse, the woman whose decades of work with the FBI's behavioral science unit was so influential it became the basis for the Netflix series Mindhunter. Dr. Gary Brucato, forensic psychologist, Boston College, co-author of leading research on targeted violence, and alongside them, additional experts in criminal profiling and behavioral analysis. What they said on that broadcast was the kind of statement that gets remembered after a case is solved. They said the person on Nancy Guthrie's porch, the masked figure captured on the doorbell camera at 1:47 in the morning, may already be dead. Burgess described the operation as something she had not encountered before. She said it appeared well planned, that the people behind it had so far gotten away with it, and that the type of case it represented was, in her words, unlike anything she had seen. Brucato went further. He suggested that the way the crime was executed pointed to 2 different levels of intelligence at work. One operator showing what he called an amateur hour quality, visibling the equipment and execution choices. And another mind behind the operation, someone who planned, someone who organized, someone who used the operator on the porch and may have decided after the job was done that the operator was a loose end. Brucato's exact framing was striking. He said of that, if the person on the porch is alive and is caught, he will lead down the spiderweb to the center, suggesting that the person on the camera is not the brain of this operation. He is a limb of it. This is not random speculation from a YouTube channel. This is three of the most respected criminal profilers in the country sitting together on a national broadcast and saying on the record that the visible suspect in this case may have been killed by the invisible one. Think about what that means for the investigation. If they are right, and I want to be clear, this is their theory, not a confirmed fact, then the DNA samples sitting in the Quantico laboratory right now are the only witnesses left in this case who cannot be silenced. Doorbell camera footage cannot be intimidated into changing its story. Cell tower records cannot be paid off. The genetic genealogy database cannot be threatened. This is also why the 4-day delay matters so much. Because if the experts are right, if there is a boss who planned this operation and then eliminated the man who carried it out, then those 4 days were not just a lost opportunity to find Nancy. They were a lost opportunity to catch the operator before he was removed from the equation. Whether you find that theory persuasive or not, the fact that 3 of the most credentialed minds in American criminal profiling are willing to put it on national television is itself a marker of where this case has gone. We are no longer in the territory of a simple missing person investigation. We are in the territory of a coordinated operation that may already have produced one victim, Nancy, and may already have produced a second one we have not found yet. There is a piece of evidence in this case that almost nobody talks about, and I want to put it in front of you now because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Ransom communications were sent to the Guthrie family in the days after Nancy disappeared. The demands were for payment in cryptocurrency. Reporting confirms the deadlines came. The deadlines passed and nothing happened. The FBI, in cooperation with the family, did what the FBI does in cases like this. They monitored wallet addresses. They tracked digital footprints. They engaged the protocols that have been developed over years of dealing with cryptocurrency ransom demands. In at least one instance, federal authorities arrested a 42-year-old man from California named Derek Kalla, who has been charged with sending a fraudulent ransom text message to members of the Guthrie family. According to the indictment, Kalla admitted he was following the case on television and pulled the family's contact information off a data broker website. He has no connection to the actual disappearance. He is in the FBI's framing an opportunistic scammer who saw a national tragedy and tried to extract money from it. His trial is scheduled for late June, but Kalla is not the central ransom story. The central ransom story is what did not happen with the demands that may have been genuine. The demands the FBI took seriously enough to set up monitoring around. The cryptocurrency was never claimed. The money was never moved. In a real kidnapping for ransom, that does not happen. The entire structure of a ransom kidnapping is built around the exchange. The kidnapper takes the victim. The kidnapper makes the demand. The family pays. The kidnapper either returns the victim or in the worst cases disappears with the payment, but the payment is the point. When no payment is ever attempted, when wallets sit untouched for 100 days, it tells you something specific. It tells you the ransom demand may have been a misdirection. A story constructed to point the investigation toward a financial motive and away from whatever the actual motive was. The other piece of evidence pointing the same direction is what investigators found inside the home. According to law enforcement statements, personal items were left behind. Reporting has indicated the doorbell security camera was removed and that other items the kidnappers might have been expected to take were not taken. Now think about what that means in the context of a kidnapping. Nancy is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. She has conditions that require daily medication. Anyone who has spent 20 minutes researching her, let alone someone who knows her, would note that an extended kidnapping without her medication is not a kidnapping. It is a death sentence on a delayed timer. A real ransom kidnapper plans for the hostage's survival. A dead hostage cannot be exchanged. A dead hostage cannot be photographed for proof of life. Either the people who took Nancy were so catastrophically incompetent that they overlooked the most basic element of a successful kidnapping for ransom, or keeping her alive was never the plan. I will not tell you which of those two it is, but every credentialed criminal psychologist who has discussed this case publicly has converged on the same conclusion. The ransom narrative does not match the evidence. The ransom narrative is decoration. The ransom narrative is a story being told to the investigation to send it in the wrong direction. And if that is true, then the question of what this case is actually about, what Nancy Guthrie was actually taken for, becomes a question with answers that none of us want to consider. I want to walk you through one specific failure in this investigation that has not gotten the attention it deserves. In the days after Nancy disappeared, the Pima County Sheriff's Department established a search perimeter around her home. Standard practice. They canvassed neighbors. They collected doorbell footage. They reviewed traffic camera data and license plate readers within the search zone. The radius of that perimeter, according to reporting from multiple outlets, was approximately 2 miles. Approximately 2 miles from NY's home, half a mile outside that perimeter. A couple named Elias and Danielle Strategulas lived on a quiet residential road called Camino Real. Nobody from law enforcement knocked on their door. Nobody asked to see their security footage. Nobody contacted them at all. They were in the sheriff's department's assessment outside the area of interest. They came forward on their own. After watching weeks of news coverage about NY's disappearance, the Strategulas family decided to check their own Ring doorbell camera footage from the night of February 1st. They went back through the recordings, and what they found was 12 vehicles passing through their quiet residential street between midnight and 6:00 in the morning, and one specific vehicle at exactly 2:36 a.m., roughly 8 minutes after NY's pacemaker last synced with her iPhone, according to the sheriff's department's own timeline. They brought that footage to investigators voluntarily. Retired NYPD detective Pat Brown reviewed the video with his team for Fox News Digital. Based on the silhouette, the slanted roof line, the window design, the rear quarter glass, and the vertical brake lights, Brosman and his colleagues identified the vehicle as a Kia Soul. Let me say what that means clearly. A potentially crucial piece of evidence in a national kidnapping case. A vehicle that may have been transporting Nancy Guthrie away from her home in the hour after she disappeared, was not found by the largest combined investigation in southern Arizona history. It was found by a couple watching the news and deciding to check their own camera. How many other cameras between 2 and 5 miles from NY's home were never reviewed? How many other vehicles passed through residential streets in the hours after Nancy disappeared? Captured on doorbell cameras and home security systems, the Pima County Sheriff's Department never asked to see. We do not know. The Sheriff's Department has not provided an answer. And every day that passes is another day that residential security systems overwrite their old footage every 24 to 72 hours, depending on the device. Whatever was captured in the first week of February that nobody asked to see has in many cases already been written over. This is a structural problem in how modern missing person investigations are conducted. Doorbell cameras have created a passive surveillance network across American suburbs that did not exist 10 years ago. The investigations that find that footage in the first 72 hours solve cases. The investigations that miss the window lose it forever. In Nancy Guthrie's case, the window was missed. What happens now depends entirely on whether the evidence the investigation did collect is enough to overcome the evidence that was never collected at all. Here is what every long-running criminal investigation eventually comes down to. It is not in most cases a single piece of evidence that breaks the case open. It is the moment when one of the people involved decides that protecting themselves is more important than protecting whoever they did it with. The technical term in federal prosecution is the proffer, the cooperation agreement. The decision by one defendant to come in, sit down with prosecutors, and trade everything they know for a reduced sentence. In a two-person operation, and the two DNA profiles in this case strongly suggest a two-person operation. The math is brutal. The first person who walks into a federal building and asks to cooperate receives the deal. The second person receives the full weight of every federal charge that prosecutors have spent the last 100 days building. Kidnapping, conspiracy, use of a controlled substance in the commission of a federal felony, possible transportation of a victim across state lines, or if the investigation reaches that far, international borders. The mandatory minimums alone are catastrophic. Combined, they constitute a life sentence. Every day that passes, the calculation gets more dangerous for both men. Each one has to consider whether the other is currently sitting in a lawyer's office somewhere weighing the same options. Each one has to consider whether the genetic genealogy hit when it comes will identify them first or their partner first. Each one has to consider what $1 million anonymous reward currently being offered through Crime Stoppers, and the family does to the people in their lives who know things and have been keeping quiet. $1 million, anonymous, untraceable, available to anyone in this country who picks up the phone and provides information leading to the recovery of Nancy Guthrie, or to the arrest and conviction of the people responsible for her disappearance. That kind of money does not exist in normal life. That kind of money changes the trajectory of an entire family. And the people who know things about this case, and there are people who know things, there always are watching that number sit there day after day and doing the math. The sheriff knows this. The FBI knows this. The reward is sitting there for a reason. The sheriff's language has shifted. The FBI director has gone public. The most credentialed criminal profilers in the country are telling national audiences that the operator on the porch may already be dead. The genealogist who took down the Golden State Killer is working two profiles simultaneously. Whatever happens next is not going to happen quietly. I want to end where this case actually begins. Not with theories, not with names, not with DNA samples in a Virginia laboratory, with Nancy. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942 in Kentucky. She moved to Tucson with her family in the early 1970s and she never left. She married Charles Guthrie. They had 3 children together, Cameron, Annie, and Savannah. And when Charles died in 1988 on a mining trip in Mexico at the age of 49, Nancy was 46 years old, a widow with 3 children half a continent away from where she had grown up. She did not collapse. She did not move home. She raised those kids in Tucson. She stayed in the desert. She built a life in the Catalina foothills that was quiet and routine and entirely her own. She watched her youngest daughter become the anchor of the Today Show. She lived in the same home for decades. She went to church. She knew her neighbors. By the family's account, she was sharp, independent, and entirely capable of running her own life. She was also at 84, physically vulnerable in the ways that come with being 84. A pacemaker, daily medication, limited mobility. A woman who, according to Sheriff Nanos' own description, could not walk 50 yards under her own power. She is the person at the center of all of this. Not the theories, not the names, not the investigation. Her. She has been missing for 104 days as of the day this video was published. Somewhere, a daughter who covers the news for a living is checking her phone every morning to see if today is the day the news she has spent 100 days dreading is finally going to arrive. Elizabeth Smart, and there are few voices in the country whose words carry more weight on this question, told reporters in May that Nancy could absolutely still be alive after this amount of time. Elizabeth Smart was held for 9 months. She knows what she's talking about. She is not speculating. On Mother's Day, May 10th, 4 days before this video, Savannah Guthrie posted a message to her mother on social media. She wrote, "We will never stop looking for you. We will never be at peace until we find you." That is the family. The investigation has the DNA. The genealogy is being worked. The sheriff is saying he is closer. The FBI is saying its work is ongoing. The experts are saying what they are saying. And online, the names being circulated. Tomasso, Dominic Evans are names the FBI has not confirmed that the sheriff himself has publicly defended, and that the internet has elevated to a certainty the actual evidence has not earned. But somewhere in that gap between what the investigation has and what it has not yet been able to prove is the answer. And the answer is coming. If you have watched this far, here is what I'm going to ask you to do. If you live in the Tucson area or anywhere in southern Arizona, if you remember anything from the last weeks of January or the early days of February that did not feel right at the time and has not stopped bothering you since, a vehicle that did not belong on your street, a conversation you overheard at a gas station, a face you saw somewhere you should not have, a person in your life whose behavior changed in a way you could not explain, pick up the phone. The Puma County Sheriff's Department tip line is 520,351,490. The FBI is reachable at 180. Call FBI. The reward for information leading to NY's recovery or to the arrest and conviction of the people responsible currently stands at over $1.2 million. It is anonymous. It is real. It is sitting there. If you have been following this case, share this video. Not because of me. Because every time this case stays in the public conversation, somebody who knows something is reminded that the people who took Nancy have not been forgotten, and the people who know things about them are not being forgotten either. Subscribe and turn on notifications. When the genetic genealogy results come back from Quantico, and they are coming, I will walk you through what they mean. The same way I walked you through this carefully, factually, without protecting anyone who does not deserve to be protected. Go ask. And when the arrest happens and the sheriff is now saying on the record that an arrest will happen, you will hear it here with the full context, with the full evidence, with the full story of how we got from a quiet Saturday night in Tucson to whatever the FBI is about to do. 104 days. Somewhere out there, an 84-year-old woman is missing. Somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened to her. And somewhere in a laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, a forensic genealogist is pulling a thread that does not stop until it reaches a name on an arrest warrant. Nancy is still out there. The answer is coming. And when it does, every single person watching this video will remember exactly where they were the moment it broke. I'll see you in the next one.